In my opinion, they show total ignorance of what's really going on in Russia. The idea that somehow the West provoked Putin into this murderous war of aggression is just complete nonsense. The idea that NATO is a provocative thing, it just doesn't ring true. NATO is a defense organization. It's kind of like saying that you live in a bad neighborhood and you decide you want to put bars up on your window, and you get the guy to come and measure the bars, and then the crooks come and break into your house before you put the bars on the window. That's what that's what that's what is going on here. But most importantly, NATO has nothing to do with this invasion. NATO is a total kind of red herring. If NATO really was, then after Finland and Sweden joined NATO, why isn't Putin at war with them? I find it a very ignorant statement that he made.
And so, Bill, why do you think Nigel Farage has made these comments now? Do you think this is a deeply held view that he has? Do you think he's done it as a provocation as part of the election campaign?
Well, it certainly got him a lot of attention in an election where Labor is leading everybody in leaps and bounds. The headlines were about him today. That's the only reason I can think of. I was actually on his TV show on GB News, talking about my campaign to get justice for my murdered lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, and talking about Putin, and he was the most sympathetic guy in the world on that show. And so, um, if he does have deeply held beliefs, it wasn't he didn't show them on that show, and so
Oh,
it's all.
that's interesting. And when did you do that show?
I mean, it must have been about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago.
And he
Um,
showed no signs of great sympathy for Putin.
he had huge sympathy for me and for my mission, and for all the terrible things that we've suffered at the hands of Putin. And so I find it a little odd and disconcerting that he's changed his tone towards Putin now.
And as you say, perhaps it's opportunistic from an election point of view, although it does seem odd because that doesn't seem where the British public are. So Tony Brenton, let's bring you into the conversation. You're a former British ambassador to Russia. How will these comments be taken in an international point of view? Because Nigel Farage, while he is not an elected member of parliament, he's still a very influential voice in Britain and in this election.
Well, let me just start off in a slightly different place, if I may. I have a rather different picture of the validity of Farage's comments than Bill has, and Bill must know this. What Farage actually said was, and he's right, Putin was wrong to launch the war. And we all agree it's an illegal war, it's a bad war, it's been appallingly done, and all of that. What Farage then went on to say was that the West's move towards including Ukraine in NATO was part of what provoked Putin to do it. And I'm afraid he's absolutely right on that. I was actually in Russia as the British ambassador in 2008, when the decision by a NATO summit in Bucharest to push Ukraine towards membership was taken. I spoke to senior Russians at the time, and they were appalled and horrified. Now, my reporting, I can't say, but one document which has hit the public domain was my colleague Bill Burns, who at the time was the US ambassador in Moscow, produced a report saying every Russian they know, from the cleanest liberal to the most knuckle-dragging inhabitants of Putin's Kremlin, hated and were appalled by and felt threatened by the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. So on that point, Farage, I'm afraid, is right. And what is interesting to me is the intensity of a lot of people to dismiss this, because it adds to a picture of Putin as basically the demon, as a man who's determined to expand Russia and crush everything under his feet, which is just wrong. The man is rational. He has the support, I'm afraid, of most of the Russian people, as does his war. And we need to bear that in mind as we handle Putin going forward.
Bill, do you want to come back on that?
I completely and absolutely disagree with that. Putin launched this war for a very different reason. Putin is a man who is desperate to stay in power. He understands that if he ever lose power, he would go to jail, lose his money, and die. And so he's always very sensitive to public opinion, and if it starts to become something where he's not sort of solidly in place. And I should point out that Russia is not a democracy, but if general public opinion is kind of against him, then he's got to do something about it. And every time, there's a very good chart which shows the public approval ratings of Putin. And in 2008, around the time of the global financial crisis, his approval ratings weren't high. And he went into Georgia. He invaded Georgia, and his approval ratings went way, way up. And he was doing well for a period of time. And then around 2014, his approval ratings were really starting to flag. And so he took Crimea, and then shot right up. And then going through COVID and all this kind of stuff, his approval ratings again were very low. And then he went in on a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I know, and all Alexei Navalny knew, Garry Kasparov, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, these are all members of the Russian opposition, all understand that Putin's war in Ukraine is purely a war to get everybody angry at a foreign enemy to stay in power. It's Machiavelli 101. This whole idea that NATO provoked this is just a red herring. It has nothing to do with reality. Sure, they might have been upset about NATO. They're upset about a lot of different things. But just to finish off, we made a commitment a very long time ago. And I say we, the United Kingdom and the United States, made a commitment to Ukraine that if they gave up their nuclear weapons, that we would protect their territorial integrity. They gave up their nuclear weapons. And of course, Russia was part of that agreement as well. Russia has now challenged their territorial integrity. And it's our duty, it's our absolute duty to Ukraine to do everything possible to protect them.
I certainly agree with that last point. Yes, we must back the Ukrainians to the hilt. So there's no question there. Nevertheless, the way the war is now going, we may find ourselves, I'm afraid, in a negotiation with Putin. We have to face that reality. And it does not help, as we approach that negotiation, to view the man as anything other than what he really is. And what he really is the leader of a Russia, which, roughly speaking, is united around him, is determined to win its war, and with whom, therefore, we may eventually, I'm afraid, have to make some compromises to bring that war to an end.
Okay, well, look, so Tony, just on that point, I mean, just to pick up on what Sybil said, I mean, if the Russian people don't like President Putin, they haven't really got many avenues to express that, have you? I mean, let's be honest about that. I mean,
yeah, no,
he's not, there's not like a grateful public who have this natural love and affection. But if anybody dissents, they are cracked down on pretty hard in Russia. And then the second point, I guess, is you're making a point about further down the track about a negotiation. And there are people who I've spoken to before who have said that we might end up in that position. But that's not where the kind of most of the allies are at the moment. The conversation in diplomatic circles from governments and foreign ministers across the world is, what can we do to shore up Ukraine? Ukraine has got to win the war. In fact, people are very nervous about, President Trump coming in and maybe if he does come in, we might be down your scenario of negotiation. But negotiation is not where the international political mood is right now, certainly from Western allies, is it?
No, I mean, the 2 points there. On your first point about Russian public opinion, you're absolutely right that Russia has become much more repressive and autocratic, partly as a result of this war. Nevertheless, there are 1 or 2 polling organizations still functioning there, which offer something which we like to think approximates to the truth. And you get the mood. You talk to people. I know a lot of people who go in and out of Russia. And the Russians, whatever else they may be, and I don't think they're entirely happy. I think there's a certain brittleness about Russian public opinion at the moment.
Well, I'm sure all the mothers who are losing their sons.
But just to finish the point, but the Russians are a patriotic people, as we regularly see in their history. They're in a war, and being in a war, they are determined that their country will win. And that, I mean, you may not like it, we may not like it, but that's an important political fact going forward. It's a reason why Putin has survived what was an eminently stupid and destructive war, has nevertheless survived, and a huge number of deaths, because the Russians rally around their leaders in times of national crisis. Now, on the question of negotiation, yes, you're right that for the moment we maintain pressure for, in effect, Zelensky's aims, which are complete defeat, complete return of the Ukraine's national lands, and war crimes trials and all of that. The signs are, this may change, are that we are not going to get there. We're in for an extended period of continuing destruction, of continuing death, and moreover, on the edge of a face-to-face confrontation between nuclear powers. That's a dangerous, uncomfortable, and destructive place to be. Now, we sustain it for the moment because, as you say, we have hopes that the arrival of new Western weapons will make a difference. We've had those hopes before, and they've never been fulfilled. Okay, it may be true this time. But if they are not fulfilled, then a time will surely come when the level of destruction and the level of danger reaches the point where it becomes better to talk.
Okay, look, so Bill, I mean, that's an interesting point that Sir Tony has raised. I mean, many people talk, I mean, Max Hastings wrote a piece a while ago. I'll double check if it was him, but you know, people have talked at some point, the killing and the fighting and the destruction may just be so exhausting that they may have to be, I think it's been described as a sordid deal or some kind of talking and negotiation. Do you accept that that point may come?
I don't think it's ever going to come for a very simple reason, that Putin can't compromise. So for him, this war is an existential war for his own existence. If for any reason he comes to the table and makes a compromise, then he looks weak and the Russian people will get rid of him. And if they get rid of him, they'll kill him. And so for Putin, he has to be at this war. And look at that. They've lost 500,000 young men already, which is just an enormous amount of soldiers. I mean, the Soviets only lost 15,000 in 10 years in Afghanistan. They've lost 500,000. Putin can't give up. And on the Ukrainian side, nor can they. We see what happens when the Russians take over Ukrainian territory in Bucha and Irpin. All the women are raped, all the men are tortured, and all the children are kidnapped. And so neither side can give up. And so it's a fantasy to think that there's going to be some type of compromise and peace treaty, because neither side can give up because it's too important for both sides. And so this is going to carry on. And to have a potential political leader here talking about it being our fault, that it's all about NATO, that there's some type of negotiation to be had, all that does is feed into Putin's narrative. And Putin, this is exactly Putin's, what he's been repeating over and over again. It doesn't help us at all. And as you said, it's completely out of touch with British public opinion. There's nobody in the Conservatives or Labour or Liberal Democrats that have any kind of sympathy to Putin. It just doesn't make any sense for him to be doing that from an electoral standpoint. And
just a final point to you on that, Sir Tony. I mean, that's my original question to you. What do you think Farage's comments, how do you think they'll be received in international diplomatic circles?
Well, I mean, very similarly to how, well, depends how international you're going. Within the West, within the coalition who are backing Ukraine at the moment, they will, of course, be reprehended totally. More widely than that, I think you will find a certain amount of sympathy in the famous global South, as we now call it, for the observation that it was our intent to expand NATO and to include Ukraine had quite a lot to do with creating the situation which led to the war. And that doesn't detract from, I hope Bill accepts this, Farage said yesterday in his comments, I mean, the latter part has received more attention, but he said very clearly that Putin is responsible for the war. That's true. We all know it's true. Nobody's questioning that.
Okay, a very interesting, thought-provoking conversation. My huge thanks to Sir Bill Browder and to Sir Tony Brenton. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.
Thanks very much. And good to see you again, Bill.
You too.
We should get together sometime.
I hope so.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really excellent. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.